stress tolerance, and stress mitigation. Do you know the difference? We're going to talk about that today on this episode of Blueprint to Yield. Hey everyone, Mike Evans here with Calibrated Agronomy. I'm here with Julie Sannar from Soil Basics and my man Clint Frese from Calibrated Agronomy. So we're talking about stress tolerance and stress mitigation.
Yeah, I think the farmers in general, there is a lot of stress mitigation products. It has become really a hot topic in all things ag. And, there's lots of different options for that. And there's a lot of effective tools, really. But knowing what tool to use and when is really critical. And because you can take things backwards from what we've kind of seen. But one of the first things that I think is really important for farmers to understand is we can actually build stress tolerance. And what we mean by that is looking at our nutritional weaknesses first, and building a healthy plant that kind of can, a healthy plant can turn on its own defense system. It's not completely helpless. So the better job we do with our nutrition management, I think the better we set that crop up to mitigate stress on its own. But, before we started this podcast, I was talking to Julie and she's like, well, the nutrition's important, but the biology is really important too. So if you want to elaborate a little bit on that, how that all works together coupled with the nutrition?
Sure. Well, we need to recognize that microbiology is a huge player. Even though we can't see them, it's a huge player in that nutrient acquisition for the plants. And we're trying to build up that relationship between the soil, the plant, and whenever the plant is in high demand, if the microbiology has already primed those pathways for the nutrient acquisition, it's just a simultaneous process. There's not a lag time in us seeing the need and being able to respond. It's just an instantaneous response for the plant. And so that mitigates the stress, or that alleviates the stress, or it just doesn't ever happen because everything's already primed and ready to go.
Yeah.
When needed.
Which is pretty dang interesting, really. Yeah. We've been able to kind of measure what she's talking about in SAP for quite a while. And I think that's cool, to, solubilize those nutrients and then deliver them, quickly to the plant. So,
yeah. And I think, that's fascinating stuff. When we're looking at this subject alone, mitigations, like you said, Clint, it's been a very hot topic lately in the last couple of years. And to me, we were kind of talking this whole week is, mitigation. To me, mitigation is a little bit of a reactive kind of process.
Yeah. Because
you're trying to mitigate a stress, that's going to happen, that is going to happen. Whereas tolerance, we're working on building a healthier, better plant to handle anything, right? Am I thinking of that right, Clint?
Yeah, and I think you look at all our programs at Calibrated or what they're doing out in California, it's all biology focused first to help deliver those minerals, but then, it's all about the SAP from there on out for us, right? So where we've made management decisions on how we're using nutrition, when we should be feeding in season. And I think you guys really are seeing it here on Kelly's farm, where having great corn yields without fungicide, which is kind of unheard of, really, in the Corn Belt, I would say.
Well, yeah. And I think, that the tolerance thing is really interesting. And I think what Julie, you're talking about, and I think this is anybody out there listening to this is going to be like, you're telling me biology is a tool, because all we hear of biology is nutrient reduction, nutrient efficiency, right? There isn't a lot of people out there talking about biology as a tool in the plant to help it defend itself. So I think could you explain a little bit more in depth? You don't have to go too in depth, but that premise of using biology to help the plant build tolerance.
Sure. I think there's something, you look at genetic potential in the plant. And when you have microbiology present, the biochemical pathways, the nutrient pathways, those are all primed. And when the plant's developing, just in a natural process, we know there are mutations. There's going to be some things that need some corrections along the way. And when microbiology is part of the plant and that formation process, the microbiology can make corrections. They can correct those mutations. And so really perfect the plant, get it to its true genetic potential.
Mm-hmm.
And then within that process, if there's access to the nutrition and all those building blocks that it needs, micronutrients, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, if all those are readily available, the pathways, the nutrient acquisition pathways, the biochemical pathways are all primed. So when a stress event comes, it's a strong plant.
Mm-hmm.
And something that Dr. White explained to us one time, Dr. White from Rutgers University, he said that from a chemical standpoint, you can add a lot of synthetic nitrogen, for example, and the plant will grow bigger. You can grow a bigger plant with that, but it's not going to be a stronger plant. If microbiology is part of that plant, priming the pathways, making all those corrections genetically, you will have a stronger plant. So when the stress comes, it's resilient. It's able to access the nutrition. It's able to augment all of the natural pathways to have the nitrogen available, all the phosphate, all the things that we're trying to add and trying to second guess what the plant is going to need. Those pathways are already there and primed.
That's awesome. Clint, she's talking about, and I think this is one thing we could explain is, if I'm a grower out there or a consultant listening to this, she's talking about priming pathways in the plant. Maybe I don't understand that very well. Can you kind of maybe go a little bit into what that means?
Yeah.
So they understand it?
So, doing a lot of work with gene expression analysis right now. And I think what we're starting to learn is the plant naturally wants to take care of itself. It's got a growth mechanism in it, and it's also got a very good defensive mechanism. And when she talks about priming those pathways, it's really the induced systematic resistance, the ISR or the SAR, the systematic acquired resistance. You can prime those, and the plant prefers to do that on its own with all these biochemical pathways that she's talking about, but it prefers to have the biology coupled with the nutrition, coupled with photosynthesis and all the carbohydrates, and create these compounds on their own. And that way, the plant, when it needs to focus on growth, it focuses on growth. But when it has a bug that's, biting on that upper leaf, it knows to mobilize different proteins to try to stop that defense. But when we use PGRs too much, I think the whole point of this podcast is to let the plant and the biology coupled with the nutrition, let it work, let it do its thing, enhance the genetic expression. When we bypass that and go right to a hormone response, that is a hard push, and it sends the plant in a direction that sometimes maybe we don't always want. And I know through all our trials, we're seeing where you use the wrong hormone at the wrong time, and there's a yield ramification for that.
That was a negative kickback that we don't like.
Yeah.
So Julie, Clint did a great job explaining that. Could you kind of, we talked about priming the pathways and the biological piece of it. The next thing we always talk about here at Calibrated Agronomy is the mineral nutrition piece of that. Mm-hmm. How important is that to also have that in place for the plant to do the be a stress tolerant plant?
Do you mean what we add as mineral nutrition, or having the table set for the plant?
Yeah, I think the question I'm asking is, if we're going to go, say I'm a grower, I'm listening to you guys, and I'm going to go put on biology. I'm going to go do this, and it's going to save me from everything. But what we learned too, when Clint kind of highlighted, is adding the mineral nutrition with the biology is sometimes the best thing, because we need those nutrients there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
No, it does. It does. Right. And it's important to not overdo it on what we add. So kind of to reemphasize what you were saying is sometimes, and I think it's kind of a normal response, or we're very proactive, mm-hmm. is we want to supply everything that the plant needs. We know what we want as an end result, and it's going to take this many pounds to do it. That's a requirement. That's a chemical dependency, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think that that's the only way to get that, then that's what you're going to apply. But if you recognize the natural processes and applying the microbiology, supporting the microbiology, along with just enough mineral nutrition and all those raw materials that the biology needs, just setting the table for them to go to work. It does take a little bit of trust in the system.
Yep.
But it does work much better than that chemical pathway, the synthetic pathway. The natural pathway is always stronger. It's always more resilient. For a long time, we've underestimated the potential of the plants and definitely what the microbial role is in nutrient acquisition and in priming these pathways. And it does take a lot of trust. When we want to rely on what we know is required and we go in that chemical pathway, we get to a point where it immobilizes the microbial interaction, that the microbes are just completely, they shut down because they know, hey, why should I produce nitrogen? It's abundant here.
Yep.
I don't need to do any more work. So they just kind of immobilize, go to sleep. And then we don't have that help. We don't have that extra boom to the whole process. The pathways that are dropped or they're immobilized. So that's...
Well, Mike, we see that all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times in our earlier part of our career have we overdone nitrogen to the point where things look beautiful, all the way to tassel, and then all of a sudden, the plant starts to cannibalize itself. There's disease sets in rampant. So, we definitely want to keep that biology working season long. And so that's part of the whole reason why Calibrated's so focused on this in-season nutrient management program, so we can take those big shots Julie's, talking about and tame them down, keep the biology working.
Yeah. And I think that goes into you kind of lead into another kind of fits into this role. You just talked about nitrogen. And I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Clint, but say we have a year like last year, be a great example, a little drier, a little tougher year than we're at right now in this crop. And guys were a little disappointed in their yields. And the first question, 80% of the first questions I get is, did I have enough nitrogen on?
Yeah.
And I think that's the mentality they've been trained to is some of that. And what we're kind of talking about here is a little opposite of that. Aren't we? A little bit like maybe if your yields went back, did we do everything right as a holistic approach? Microbiology, all that stuff. Because putting on more nitrogen isn't necessarily creating a stress tolerant plant, is it?
Well, I mean, I look back to last year where we followed SAP, had a strong biological program up front. And, some of our farmers that were sending in videos last fall, I remember several of them less than 100 pounds, 125 pounds of total in throughout the season. But they focused on potassium in the dry season last year. They focused on the biology. They focused on the micronutrients and had a lot of corn knocking on the 300 bushel door realm, which I think if you would have told me that 8 years ago, I'd have been like, well, I don't know. I'm not.
You're crazy.
You're crazy. Yeah. Yeah. So, it's, once you start to see this system kind of move, it's pretty awesome, really.
Yeah. I mean, would you read kind of what we're saying, Julie?
I do. And it does take some trust. And to emphasize another thing that Dr. White told us is, you agronomists, you worry about all this chemistry. He said, but I'm a microbiologist and I let the microbes do the chemistry, which is so true. That emphasizes what you just said.
100%. And, on that side, creating the stress tolerance, we can test for these pathways now. This is through Rise Bio, it's pretty economical test, you know, and then we can show what our products do to open up those pathways. So I think, you guys got questions or they are skeptical about this, run a few tests, see where your pathways are at and, let's go down the road. So.
Yeah. I think that's a great thing. I think one thing I wanted to talk about, because you guys, we all do a lot of research. I mean, that's kind of the heart of what we do.
Yeah.
But you've done some work with, the product you make, BioEgg, and that we use a lot of. And I think you've seen the pathways, and we've been able to see the sap. Can you just kind of go into that? Why the biology is, using. My mind goes to my retail brain. It's like we see a problem, we go fix it with synthetics or a product.
Yeah.
But from what you've seen from your research with implementing the biology, like Julie's saying, and the mineral nutrition and following that, you've seen the plant change based on the research, correct?
Oh, 100%. And so, the thing that I think makes BioAg and Soil Basics different from a lot of other biological companies, we're focused on a very diverse consortium of biology. We want the plant to be able to dictate what it needs from our inoculums. So, when I think to kind of make this more simple, when I think about the nutrient pathways she talks about, when we get our reports back, we've got solubilizers. So, microbiology that takes inorganic or unplant available nutrition, makes it available, but then we also got all sorts of transport microbes, the endophytes that actually carry those nutrients up into the root system. So we can see that on our reports, which I think's awesome to be able to kind of validify, that hey, we can do all these. And so one thing about all our products, we do all 15 nutrients. When we look at them, we can solubilize them, we can transport them. And then the other thing, back to the whole defense system, it's what we call stress adaptation pathways. So pathways within the microbial community that produce all the hormones. That's one thing that I did not understand even 3 years ago. Microbiology is huge in producing these hormones, and then it works with the plant to decide when and how much, and it's a self-regulating deal. And so I think, if you're truly wanting to build a healthier plant later in the season, microbiology and nutrition are the foundation. Mm-hmm. I think, I'm guilty of this myself. I'm sure you have been too, where we jump right to the PGRs, like, oh, this is going to save our butt and kick this plant in a different direction. And, if we get the first two rungs right, we don't really need the stress mitigation tools until things get really bad.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Julie, I'm going to go from this angle. Like, I'm a corn and soybean grower from Iowa, listening to this podcast. And what you guys are talking about, biology, is such a foreign concept as a tool to use in my farm. And I've had bad experiences from biology products, or inconsistent. Let's go with that. Probably be a better way to put it. But you guys out west in California, I mean, is this standard practice, this mentality on the crops you raise out there?
It is for us. We've been using microbiology for a long time, and the more we learn, the more we realize that it should be the foundation of everything we do. And that's something like in all our products, we incorporate the microbiology and nutrition, and then support for both the plant and the microbiology, just so we can have that continued effect and that continued stress resilience, stress tolerance. But I think it's becoming more acceptable. Mm-hmm. For a long time, everybody's been doing the same, kind of going out of the same playbook, right? And just focusing on the big three. And then now there's some other things that are coming into play that are more recognizable in the industry. And I think the leading one is microbiology.
Is there a success story from this kind of process that you've had? Like, maybe this is a tough question, but you went from taking a grower from completely synthetic PGRs, like Clint said, to more of this philosophy to build a more stress tolerant plant and have success and a healthier system?
Yes, we've had lots of them over the years. You've kind of put me on the spot. I'm trying to think of just one that's a good, but we've had, and sometimes I think about, I think it has been part of everything we do. So we've had, that's just the way it is.
Becomes practice.
It's normal. It's more normal for us. But we have had a lot more acceptance of that and getting some more growers to adopt that microbiology is a key player. And really what is a very critical thing is that in your practices, you incorporate the microbiology, get them flourishing. It's really important that you don't immobilize them with the big shot of the nitrogen or phosphorus, in season, because that happens all the time. We'll get people, things are just going really well. The microbiology's flourishing in the soil and all systems are running. And then there's an immobilizing application.
They get nervous and I got to do this.
Yes.
And they go backwards.
And you just don't realize that can happen, that it can just so quickly, you can immobilize everything. So, but yeah, last year we had an extremely huge heat wave. California is notoriously, we have hot summers. In the Central Valley, we had 120 degree weather, which we never get to that. I mean, maybe for a day, for a couple of hours, but we had duration, like multiple days in a row of 115 to 120 degrees. And it was just during prime crop finishing. I mean, the stress was just awful. Everything shuts down. So that was a real testing time for us. And most of our growers came through. I mean, it wasn't pretty, but we still had good yields, good harvest, and we made it through because of some of these things that were in place. And I think it's because we had resilient plants, resilient crops that
you built that stress tolerant plant that, like Clint said, defended. So it's primed to defend
yes,
itself.
Yeah, the pathways are primed, and we did have to do some extra support with some of these other products, but I think the foundation was there with the microbiology. Clint,
I mean, you consult with a lot of guys over in your part of the world. I mean, what's been the path? If I'm listening to this and I don't know anything, like your guys, you got taking them down this path. What's been the process? Is it just completely cut everything out and start over, or is it like, hey, let's do steps? Or
no, we definitely don't cut everything out and just start completely over. I think I did that, and it was a crawl back to the middle. So I believe, personally, I believe the answer is always somewhere in the middle. And so, our most successful dealers that are having success with farmers, or are the farmers we get to work with, are ones that have adopted a middle ground. And it kind of goes back to listen to you guys do the last podcast. It's a reduction by 50% in the fall, allowing to do some more small shots in season. And so the one thing I think is super cool, think about the blends we build, Mike, where we're constantly putting the carbon support, the organic acid support with the biology and the nutrition. They've got that all kind of all in one, And so I think the industry is headed there. You just look at all the big companies and what they're buying up. They're not buying synthetic CP anymore. They're buying biostimulant biology companies. So it's a direction we're headed. And I think it's really a race to who can understand it and come up with the best implementation strategy. And I feel collectively we've got a great one, here. So
yeah, that's a great point, Clint. He's Clint Frese. This is Miss Julie Sannar from California and Soil Basics. I'm Mike Evans. If you want to learn more about stress tolerant plants, please reach out to us at Calibrated Agronomy. And we'll catch you on the next episode of Blueprint to Yield.